So for the sewing machine kit, I just want to clarify that this is the graphic instruction sewing for hand sewing, okay? This is the graphic. A graphic would be a drawing of some kind. So this is the drawing, and it is out of your book. So in your book, you also have that particular diagram, but it's not in that way. Each diagram is with the instruction sheet, okay? The 7x7 fabric square for the ruffle is 2 pieces, and most of you got it. It's a piece that looks like this. It's unmatched to your larger piece. And then there's a 14-inch piece that is 14x3, okay? This is the piece that we'll use for the ruffle. For some of you, it may have been pinned together like this. So please double check and see if you have that, if you sent me an email saying you need it. If you still need it, absolutely fine. The 7x7 square with facing or understitching looks like this. Basically, it looks like a baby bib, right? So they're pinned together. It has a piece of this iron-on interfacing. It has a facing, and it has a piece of fabric. So that's what this is. Make sure that you've gone through every item in your baggie, and then I am happy to give you the rest of the items that you need. And if you're in town, you'll pick them up, and I think Cara is the only one I have to mail to. And I have cut your crepe hair too, so you'll get that. We won't need it for a week or two. Then your COVID non-woven filter for your mask looks like this. It's very similar to the interfacing, but it does not have the glue piece on it. So don't get those confused. And also this is big. This is a 6x9 piece, and your interfacing is either the shape of your understitching like this, or it's the shape of your buttonhole closure piece, which is a narrow strip, which we used last time. And we put it into our closure looking like this. This is our closure sample. And this is the piece inside. I have to get to a place where I can open it. So you can see the white piece. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? So any questions on the sewing machine kit baggies? Because this is really important going forward. We need to have this. Just think about it for a second. No rush. It's a lot of moving pieces. So I want you to make sure that you have all of the pieces. And in addition, you should have a complete pattern, which is not, everyone will have a different pattern. When we get to pattern identification, we will be discussing this. I have made a lab that is all identical, and then you'll just have a pattern so that you can take it apart and look at it. And then if you want to use it for wrapping up fine china, you can do that also. Okay, one other thing that I need to absolutely mention is this little piece that you'll get. Okay, so here's your commercial pattern piece. There's an outline. I'll put that online. But your commercial pattern piece will all be working with this Xerox first when we discuss the items that are on your commercial pattern. Please don't think about that yet. That's something you'll get. I'm just trying to give you, you know, it's like giving you a lab book or something like that. But this is something that's very important. This is our fabric identification piece. Everyone's getting 42 fabric samples. So the really important thing about this is do not take them apart. Okay, they are carefully put together in order, and we will address them in order. So this is non-woven, and this is woven. And when we get to this part, we will do this all together. Please do not undo these safety pins because then you'll end up with something that you can't identify. Is that clear for everybody? I know it looks very fun and they are super fun. So you're getting all these cool little fabric samples and we will be discussing them and you'll get to know what their fiber content is and their weave. So they're going to be non-woven and woven. And when we get to this portion, we will work on that. Okay, so that should hopefully clear up anything that we have a question on with regards to the sewing machine kit, which is this. And that's in your Canvas site. Okay, any questions regarding that? Okay, very good. One thing that's in there, we're going to work with today. So you should have your sewing machine ready. As we've discussed for the last 2 days, we're working with sewing machine. And we need to have the 2 sewing machine mazes. And those are under your miscellaneous items. Sewing machine hole punch angle. And this is the angle hole punch. And this is sewing machine punch curve. Okay. So I'm going to demo this and then we will have a chance to work with it. Who can set their machine up now? Because I asked everyone who did not have a machine to please come and pick one up. Okay.
Where are those papers?
I can't, Cara. Let's see. Are you muted? No. Let me see if I don't have the sound up. Just a minute. Okay, go ahead, Cara.
Where are those papers in your hands?
Wait a second. Can't hear you. See if I. Is your sound? Is your volume up all the way?
Yeah, it is.
Try it now. Oh wait. Okay. Now try it.
Can you hear me now?
Very good.
Okay. Those papers in your hand, where are those?
Those I have to. That's yeah. They're in your book. Did you get a book?
Yeah.
Okay. And then also I need to send them to you. Let me, here's what I can do. Do you have a printer?
Yes.
Okay. I will simply also put them on our sewing machine page with the seams. So I'll do that. You just hold on a second. I'll do it when people start. So is everybody ready to start to look at this demonstration? And then I'll put this on our Canvas page and then you'll get it. That way you can make multiple copies of it if you'd like. So we're going to do this with no thread. And then if you want extra credit, you will do it with thread. So there's a couple important things that we'll keep in mind here. The whole purpose for doing this is to get used to tracing and then pivoting on a corner. The next one, which is harder, and I'll warn you right now, it's much harder, is to trace and do a curve, pivot, and then curve and come back. So all this is machine dexterity. It's a practice so you get used to your apparatus. Okay. I'm going to use a Bernina. Let me see if I can clear the background a little bit. Okay, that's a little bit better. And I'll try and actually, maybe I can get a dark. So this is my machine. Everyone has a machine that's slightly different. And I have a FOF here, which is the one that is slightly different. But otherwise, most of the machines look like this. There is a way to turn them on. So figure out the way to turn your machine on. This is the way this machine turns on. The light is on. If I turn here and the light is off, it's still on, but I need to do 2 clicks. Okay. So my machine, I'm going to unthread my machine. I have nippers by my machine. I'm going to take my piece of fabric out and roll my thread up. The way that I found my machine is a good way to leave your machine. It is with the presser foot down and the needle in so that the machine is completely relaxed. Notice I'm wheeling this towards me. Lift up my presser foot and I can remove things. Remember, here's the flipper. I'm going to put this closer so you can see it. All the machines that I looked at do have this flipper, which is here for the bobbin. And I'll pull this out. If I hold on to this piece, my bobbin comes with it and it does not fall out like that. If I let go of it, it falls out. So now I have to retrieve this off the floor. Oh, well, actually, I had no thread in it. So there you go. We'll wind a bobbin. This is Pam diving down on the floor to get the bobbin. No surprise. Okay. Again, here's the bobbin case. There's a post and the circle of the bobbin fits on the post. If I don't want this bobbin to fall out like it just did, I hold on to the flipper on the back or this lever. Here's the lever. Every bobbin has a lever. Not every bobbin has this finger. Some just have this space, okay? So if I have this on there, it should not fall out. I'm holding my flip open right here, okay? And that will be important because when we get thread underneath and the thread starts running all over the floor, it's not going to be very pretty. Now I'm going to stop. I need to get a tissue because these machines are serviced and it's very oily. If you haven't used your machine for a while, you want to take a look at it and see if there's thread that has collected in here by the bobbin case. Because this is a place where thread collects and you want to remove it from here. Also, thread can collect here in the feed dog area, okay? So there's a way that you want to look at those feed dog, they will come forward. As the needle goes down, those feed dog are little teeth and they grab your thread, your fabric, and pull it back. The presser foot holds the fabric to the feed dog so it moves it. And it's going to hold your paper. So for now, I don't need my bobbin. I'm going to leave it out because I'm going to use this with no thread. It's not necessary, but you can take your bobbin in and out. Does everybody have that? When you start working, we're going to work with the, I'm going to just demo it first and then we'll give you time to work. Work with the angle one first, where it says start. You're going to put your presser foot here and have the working side of your fabric to the outside of your machine. So I'm going to put the start underneath my presser foot and then put my presser foot down and sink my needle so that I'm ready to sew along this line. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Fingers, thumbs up if you've got it, or the yes button, like this, right? If you have a question, this would be the perfect time to ask. Otherwise, I'm just going to demo for a second. Let's see if I can get a little tiny bit higher. It might be easier for this. You can see the bed of my machine. All right, so you're seeing the top of my machine. I'm going to stitch along this line to the corner and stop with my needle in. So here we go. Make sure I'm plugged in. Okay. I'm on a slightly different machine. Okay, I'm going to stitch this way. And then up to the end of my arrow and sink my needle. Then lift my presser foot and pivot my paper. And then I will stitch down the other side as well. So the purpose of this exercise is to use your foot pedal, your gas pedal, so that you can actually stop where you want it to know how to turn. And if you go off, I need to go backwards now because I am off one. So I'm going to go back. And then I'll be right on the money. Okay. For me, this is my reverse. Remember, this symbol is the universal reverse symbol. It's the arrow. And what you want to think of is U-turn. Okay. If you do a U-turn, you're going back. For me, it's this machine. For some of you, it's a lever here. For some of you, it might be a button. And if you have any questions on that, I can absolutely just look at your machine and we can talk about it. So I have my needle in, I'm at my next corner, and I will stitch. And then stop and pivot and so forth. Does that make sense to everybody? So when I am holding my paper up, you'll be able to see, let's see if I can get the light on it. You should be able to see your stitches through there. And are your dots, here you go, you can see some of my dots. Are your dots on the line? Here's my dots going down this side, okay? So that's, you wanna start here and put it in. We'll talk about all this stuff after we have a chance to do this. I'm gonna load this up to Canvas so that Cara can print it. And then how many of you are ready to work on this project right now? Give me a thumbs up.
Hey, Pam, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm having some technical problems here. Can you hear me?
Totally.
Okay.
Yep. So, and you can always put everything in the chat. So please let me know if you're ready. Ezra, how about you? Is your machine out? You have it?
Yeah, I'm at home right now. I'm not in Santa Barbara. So my mom has a sewing machine, but I'm trying to figure it out.
Okay, why don't I, I'll put screen share so that you can point it at your machine and I can look at it. And let's do that. If any questions, I can simply look at your machine and we'll figure it out.
Let me just put it on this hard surface because I'm on my bed right now. So I'm trying to figure out where to put it, but I have this hard thing I'm gonna put it on.
Yeah, you really need a hard surface. That's a very good idea. And the other thing is, you know, it's a while to set it up. So if you're going to be home with the machine, for example, I had to bring a little table in so that I could figure out how to show this to you because I want to demonstrate the seam finishes as well today. And we can do our okay. Are you okay?
Yes. Sorry, I just came out of the place.
Well, machines are much heavier than you think. Cara, are you okay with your machine while we're waiting for Ezra to get hers on a flat surface?
I'm in the process of setting it up, so
Perfect.
I'm working on that now.
You can get your machine into a place where you can actually plug it in. That's where we're kind of working. So if you guys work on that for a minute, I'm going to put these into the Canvas site. You should have them in your kit, but if you don't, then you can download them and then you can have as many as you want and you'll be able to do an extra credit by adding thread to that. So I'm just going to let you look at my fabulous machine right here. And we will, I'll put this in so that it's all set to go and you can get your machine set up like this. And that's terrific. Remember, this wheel only goes towards you and you want it set up like that. Okay. I have scanned these and I'm uploading them to the Canvas site right now. And Victoria, if you have your sewing machine, we're getting them ready so that we can do our sewing machine maze. And Victoria, if you need a sewing machine, then you need to come and get one from me. So that was one of the assignments last week. Let me know either way. You can just stick it in the chat to me if you want, and then you can come get it. Okay. I'm going to pause the recording while everyone's setting up, and then we'll go back to the lecture. Okay, I'll screen share so that you can see where to find your sewing machine maze. Go to your Canvas site. You can go to modules. There will be your sewing machine maze template, and this will pop up here. And remember, you click on this you click on the little icon to have it enlarge, and you should be able to grab it. There's the angle. This is the curved. I think it took 2 curved, so don't worry about that. And here's a different angle one if you want to do a practice like that one. Okay. So that will be something that you can use. And that will be on modules. And we'll put it right underneath the sewing machine diagram. Make a lot of sense. So we're going to add that assignment, sewing machine maze. And I'll put it right underneath the sewing machine diagram. Okay. So sewing machine diagram was an assignment last week, and then this one is for our sewing machine maze. You can download those. Okay, is that clear? Good. I'm going to just work ahead. Does anyone have any questions? Did anyone finish their maze? Because I am ready to demonstrate the curved maze. So please let me know if you are set up and we're ready to go on with the next one, the trickier one. Okay. It will be the same format. We will use the start area. And make the arrow face you. So it's going to face the stitcher. And my machine is going to progress along this curve in this fashion until I get to this point, and then that's a pivot. So I'm going to put this under my presser foot here. The arrow will face me. I will stitch along my curve, moving my paper to accommodate so that I can stitch on the dots. And this is what's going to really get your technical skills up. So I call it honing your technical skills so that you're actually working with your apparatus and your hands and your garment. This is the garment. So I'm putting this in so that I am facing. My presser foot is on start. I will sink my needle and I'm going to stitch along this way, going slowly, and I'll move my fabric, my paper. See how I have to twist the paper to stay on the curve? Also, one thing that you want to do, and I'm not doing this because I am demonstrating, but if I was sewing, I would be sewing like this. I'd have my machine squared right up in front of me, and I would be sitting right at my machine so I can see it very clearly this way. I'm on the nose, like driving a car. For purposes of the demonstration, I've angled my machine so you can see it. So I'm sitting to the side, which is not a good way to get accurate stitching. So make sure you, just like a dinner plate or like a steering wheel, you want to be right up to your machine. I like to sit up on top of my machine so that I can see everything. So now I will continue with my curve. You can see it needs to go fairly slowly to stay on the line. The inside curves are the hardest, so you have to go pretty slow. And then same thing, you want to get up to that point and stop. And then I'll lift my presser foot. Generally it's on the back. It might swing this way or lift up this way. I'm going to do a few stitches, like maybe 4. And I'm right up to my mark. And then you can vary this so that I'm sewing at 2.5. You can sew smaller or larger. If you sew larger, it's going to take bigger bites and it will be harder to control. So I would suggest you do that on your straight stitch piece. I've done my 3 stitches and now I'm ready to come back. The arrow again is pointing towards me. So interestingly for me, this is an easier direction. So pay attention to what seems like it might work for you, okay? I'm going to make it a little larger. And notice that the machine, the feed dog, is pulling my paper through. I'm not pushing it or pulling it this way. The machine is feeding the paper through at a reasonable rate.
I have something to show you when you come out.
Okay. All right, questions? I heard a question, but I didn't, I heard someone speak, but I didn't hear the question exactly. No? Does anyone have a question about the curved piece? So you can see all that to just get through 2 lines. I've stitched here, pivot, straight, pivot, and then curved back. So you want to do this. And by the time you're done with this, you will feel much more comfortable with your machine because you'll be used to manipulating your fabric through here in the form of this paper. And you'll be able to go fast and slow. So one thing that you can do along the edge, just so that you get an idea, this is from the demonstration that was on our video. I'm going to put my stitches, I'm going to put my stitches small to large and just stitch along here so I can take a look at what it looks like. So you can see with this little group of stitches here, I have very small and I'm going to large. Wait a minute, let me see if I can show you. There you go. So there's my small stitches, bigger, further apart, further apart, further apart until they're the farthest apart. Okay, so that's one of the purposes of this, is to get to know your machine. Now I will lift my needle and I'm going to try that with zigzag as well. So I'm going to do a medium stitch at 2.5, and I'll go from my 0 zigzag, which is straight stitch, and work my zigzag. Remember when we move the width, and here's my zigzag symbol. When you move the width of your thread, you need to do that with your needle up, or you can break your needle. So I'm starting with straight. I'm going to do a few stitches. Then I'll go to 1. With my needle, I'll go to 2. I'll go to 3. I'll go to 4. And I'll go to 5. So without thread, this simply looks like parallel stitches. And you can see that this would be narrower. The straight stitch is 0, down to the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can see how wide apart those stitches are for both width here, and it makes them stretch this way as well. Even though I'm on 2.5 the whole time, because it's going back and forth, and so it's actually stair stepping down. So that's a sample. Is this clear for everybody? This curved piece and angled. This would truly be our first lab. We would do this lab on the very first day of class if we were in class. You would watch that sewing machine video and you'd sit down at a machine and do this. So I know it's a little hard to get your machine set up. And does anyone have any questions about setting up their machine? So if you do, just please put your yes up. And if you have completed it, put your yes up. And then we will go forward. I'm going to go ahead and show you the module that we're going to start with so that you can look at it while I go on to also show you on the board. And then I will demonstrate each one of these, okay? So if you go to your sewing machine section on your modules, here we are. The sewing machine maze templates and the sewing machine seams and recorded lecture will be here. If we go to this section, this is an old sewing machine. We actually have one like this in the shop. It's quite beautiful, hand done. This image has the presser foot too close to the edge of the fabric. Whoa. Okay, let me do that. Sorry, that shouldn't have happened. Let me go back to my site just a second. Sorry. I'm gonna have to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, here we go. And we're going to be working with these 4 seams. This is a seam from the right side of the garment before pressing. Pressing is very important every step along the way. When you sew, only 10% of your time is sitting at a sewing machine. This is the foot and needle bar of a machine much like Ezra's. You can see this is the foot very much like it. It's a Singer. And this is stitching a straight stitch at 5/8 of an inch away from a raw edge. So seam finishes deal with this raw edge so that the edge does not unravel on your clothing. And the stitch is always going to be a straight stitch. So it's a variation on a straight stitch, but how we finish this seam edge is really important. We use a 5/8 inch seam allowance because this is the width that's used on all commercial paper patterns. And we'll have a lab section discussing the commercial paper patterns. Here is our fill in the blank, which we can look at, and I'll fill it in as we go along. We'll be using 4 pieces of your 7x7, which have been cut on the straight of the grain. You want to make sure that you know which side is the wrong side. So if you have a question, like yours is a little bit hard to tell, make sure you put a tick mark with a pencil on the wrong side. Cut each piece in half to make 8 3x5 inch by 7 inch strips. And then you're going to marry 2 pieces together by putting right sides together, just so you have 4 pairs of strips. The first one we will start with is plain seam. These are blanks because I'm going to fill them in later. I want you to focus on what we're going to do on the board. Okay, let's move up to the board first. I'll take you with me. Okay, first we are going to do the plain seam, and I'll demo that right here and show you. It will end up looking like this in your book. Okay, this is a plain, this is the basted seam. It's actually the first one that we'll do. Just like hand basting, no knot top or bottom, and we'll just stitch it. So I will put this up on the board so that you can see how this will work. You have your piece 7x7. You're going to cut that in half by snip and then tearing it apart. You have two pieces then that are 3.5 3.5 inches and 7 inches. Okay. So you will cut all of your pieces this way so that you end up with a total of 8 pieces, as we just discussed. Each seam, and a seam is a way to hold 2 pieces of fabric together. Each seam has 2 pieces of fabric. So to go back to my basted seam now, your cutting list is what we discussed on the assignment page. And we will start with 2 pieces. Okay, that will look like this. The first thing you'll do is you'll place them right sides together. And remember that our right side is the printed side that is more vibrant or brighter. The faded side is the inside. The first step is place them right sides together. The second step is you will machine baste at 5/8 of an inch. Leaving a tail so that there's no back stitching. And remember in our video, back stitching is when we reverse our machine, and you're going to leave a tail at top and bottom. So you're going to leave thread tails top and bottom. So it's going to look like this when we're done. I will put my machine presser foot here. I will stitch long stitches. And this portion will be 5/8 of an inch from the edge. Okay, this will be 5/8 of an inch from the edge. I'll just zoom in on that so that you can see it. Sorry. There we go. So we're just going to put our sewing machine here and stitch down. It's our easiest stitch. All right, I'm going to mark that into our assignment page. So let me show you how that works with my screen share. So actually I'm going to put basting up here first so that I can do this live. Otherwise you won't be able to do this at home. So here's our cutting, and this is going to be the basted seam. Because we no longer do the flat felt is why we're doing the basted seam. Okay, so here's our basted seam. Number 1, 2 pieces of fabric, right sides together. Stitch. At, oh, I can't seem to spell stitch. 5/8 of an inch away from the edge. Leave a thread tail. at the top and bottom. And a thread tail should be 2 inches. I'll just say leave a 2-inch thread tail so that you're not leaving it too minimal. Okay. Now our next sample is going to be our plain seam. Again, place right sides together. What do you think the next step will be? Stitch 5/8 of an inch away from the raw edge. The next step is one of our really important steps. Press, seam, open. Okay, this is a very important thing. You will be able to use 2 edge finishes. Maybe it will be the overlock or the zigzag if you have a zigzag, if you have an overlock. And if you don't have an overlock, you can use a clean finish, which is stitch, straight stitch at 1/4 of an inch. And fold under. And then you're going to top stitch that edge. I should say fold under and press. Okay. We're going to look up here for those 2 things. Again, it's going to be almost identical. But I want to give you a little bit bigger sample to look at, and then I will demo these 2 on the machine. So this is my plain seam. I'm stitching at 5/8 of an inch and backstitch and backstitch. Then I open it and press this open. Okay, so here's my seam. And we're talking about the edge finish. On one, you're going to do a straight stitch and a zigzag to finish that raw edge. On the other, you're going to do a straight stitch, fold it under, and then top stitch. That's the clean finish edge. Okay, are we ready to go to the machine? Let's take a look. So I'm at my machine. The first thing I'm going to do is thread the machine. Threading the machine is pretty uniform for almost any machine. So I'm going to just talk you through that first. Actually, let me get this off the box for now. Okay. Almost all machines start with a thread guide. The thread is drawn across the top through a, this is the thread post, through a thread guide here, through a tension slot, down around a thread guide as well. And even in Ezra's machine, that's her tension is here. And through the take-up lever, which you can see here, it just slides into a slot there. Ezra's, yours has a hole that you're going to have to put it through, and then through your thread guide. Remember, the last thread guide on the needle bar indicates which way you'll thread. If the thread guide is here, you're going to thread left to right, and that's on the brother machine that Lois has, and that would be on your machine, Ezra, as well. The rest of the machines, the long groove side of the needle is facing you. The long groove side of the needle then indicates your thread, and it will thread front to back. So you're going to push that through and then grab your thread, making sure it does not loop around here, okay? So I'm going to show you that up close. So here's my long groove side of my needle. My thread guide, which indicates that my thread is coming straight down my machine. And then I will thread through this hole from front to back. The same as we do with our hand sewing, have about a 1/2 inch. I'm going to push it through by anchoring my hands here and then pushing it through. So you can see it is through my hole, and then pull my thread, making sure it does not loop, create an extra loop around that needle, okay? Now this is a domestic straight stitch machine. We're all working with a domestic straight stitch machine. It is 2 interlocking threads. A top thread comes down and grabs a bobbin thread, and that's the interlock right here, okay? And it's going to interlock right in this portion. So I'm going to use a different color for my bobbin so that you can see what that looks like. Remember that my bobbin, this is the bobbin itself, okay? And it goes into the bobbin casing. The bobbin casing is with the finger up, if you have a finger, or you may just have a hole like this. So you might just have a hole. I pull my thread down, it goes clockwise. The only 2 that would go counterclockwise, I think, are the singer and the brother, which would be Ezra and Lois, okay? So see how that unspools? That's what I'm talking about clockwise. It's unspooling clockwise. Ezra and Lois, yours would be the other direction. And you can tell because when you sew, it will not be even. Every bobbin casing has a small niche or a little place you can pull the thread through here. And then it goes up through the tension device, sorry, and it comes out the top. And now I'm out the top of that hole, okay? I'm going to hold on to this, open up my, let me move this back now, and put this in with the finger pacing up, and it will snap in place. And hopefully you can see that little finger in here right now. Now, if you don't have the finger, that hole is still going to go up. It's still going to go in and snap. To get this thread to engage with the top thread, I hold my top thread. I'm holding it up here because I have to balance my machine so you can see it. And I wheel my thread 1 time through. You'll see it comes through. The needle bar goes down and up. And it's going to grab that thread and bring it to the top. Okay, and now I'm going to do that far away so you can see it. So what we've done, I'm looking at my bobbin casing here. If you don't have the finger, you have a hole. This is the slot that my thread is going to slide through, and through this, which is a spring, it's a tension device. Put my bobbin in. The reason why I'm really taking a lot of time with this is because I never knew which way my bobbin went in. And sometimes my sewing would be great and sometimes it wouldn't. I couldn't figure it out. And then I'd flip my bobbin over and then it would work. So that's why I'm trying to be really specific. Just figure out which way yours goes in. And then it will unspool this way. So I know this is ready to sew. I grab this flipper so it doesn't fall out. And I can put it into my machine and it will click. Okay, that thread is hanging out. I have my top thread threaded and don't use a lot of excess thread, like 6 inches is plenty. I'm gonna thread front to back. Easy for you to say, Pam. If you're tired, it's very hard to thread your needle, just FYI. When I went back to grad school and I had kids, I thought, what's wrong with me? I can't thread my needle. Okay, hold on to your extra top thread here. You can hold it right here on the throat plate. This is the throat plate. And wheel towards you. I'm wheeling this towards me, but I'm just keeping my arm out of the way. It comes down and up once. It's grabbing this thread. I can see it grab it. And then I can pull it up and take this blue thread. So I have 2 threads on the top now. And I can close my door. So you want to practice that several times. If something's not working, rethread your machine. Okay, I'm ready to sew. You want to look at your needle. I'm noticing that my needle is going back and forth because I've left it up here on wide. I'm going to make sure I'm straight stitching on 0 width. This is the buttonhole. We ignore that for now. And I'm going to stitch at 2.5. No, first I'm going to stitch at 5. Okay. I'm going to get one of my squares. I have my squares in my baggie, just like you guys. Take it out. I know I'm going to need 4 of these, so I'm just going to peel them off. 1, 2, 3, 4. And an easy way to find halfway is to just use your iron. So let me go over to the ironing table. Which I have set up right here. I will lift you up so you can see the same as the table. Actually, let me have you look not at that window. I don't think that's optimum. There we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get my pieces, fold them in half. That way I can easily cut them and I know they'll be in half and on the straight of grain. Turn on my iron. Okay, so I'm going to get them all prepared. I am folding them with the lengthwise grain so that the lengthwise grain is going to go up and down my narrow piece. So I'm going to get all of them ready while I'm waiting for my iron to heat up. So this one I could tell was wrong because it was, my pumpkins were growing the wrong way. So here are my 4. If I press them along here, then I can cut and tear, and I know I'll be on the straight of grain. And I just take out my threads. And my first two are right sides together, so I'm going to get them in that way. These heat up pretty fast. Making sure that your pattern is still going the same direction. So I have pumpkins, I'm making sure they're all growing the same way. In other words, I don't tear it and then some of them end up upside down, okay? You wanna make sure you're checking all of those items as well. All right, if my iron's hot, I can make my water, gravity fell, come on down, and then I'll be able to use my steam. I'm gonna press. First, I'm pressing them in half. And this one, which I have already cut, I'm just gonna press it flat. So I have, this is a very easy way to put something in half. Then I have a line that I can cut on. I know I'm straight, or I can have a line that I can just tear. So all four of my pieces will be prepared. And I want to keep them all growing the same way. Okay. And then once I have them cut, the first two I know I'm going to do right sides together. So I'm going to press them right sides together. I have my two pieces, press it right sides together because that creates a little bit of stickiness. And then when you're doing a seam, you can go ahead and pin. To secure them together. So I'm sorry, I'm really bad at pinning. I pin less frequently than many. One thing about pins, pin perpendicular to your seam because your needle can jump over that pin, okay? So now I'm going to just get my next one because I've already discussed two pieces. We're going to do this one as well. And get the plain seam with our alternate seam finishes. And we'll get it identified at 1/4 of an inch, at 5/8 of an inch. How do you know what 5/8 of an inch is on your machine? Do you remember we covered that in the video? Always tending threads, folks. Fortunately, I have a trash can right there. Okay. So I'm going to put my two pieces matching and make sure that my pattern matches. And it does. So I'm going to put my pin in. Oh, that's a needle. And I'm ready to go back to my table. Okay, everyone can see clearly. So let's talk about what is a 5/8 of an inch seam and how do you find it? And this is really important. On your throat plate, usually is a series of lines, and you can actually measure them. If you have a seam gauge, which is a great device, you can actually stick it in at your needle. So this is my seam gauge. I can go right to my 5/8 of an inch. Here's 1/2, and 5/8 would be right there. I can move my little lever. so that that's my 5/8. I can see that clearly from here to here. If I sink my needle, I can just put my seam gauge right up to it. And I know this line is my 5/8 of an inch. So my seam gauge is touching my needle. The blue arrow is pointing to my line right here. Okay. And you can use anything. You know, I can use this ruler, but I'd have to measure it from the other side and not with my needle in. So I can look and see which line, your throat plate has lines on it, which one is going to be my 5/8 of an inch. On this particular one, it's the second longest line. It's the second longest line. I'll try and get you close up. There we go. So there's the throat plate. Here's my seam gauge at the throat plate. It is the second longest line is my 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to now get ready to sew my first seam. I have it on basting. I have my machine threaded top and bottom, and I have my 2 pieces. So I've ironed it. One thing about ironing is it sticks them together. It's a little bit of a glue effect. I want to make sure that my edges are even. Put that underneath at the second line, and then I'll stitch, keeping this line. My job is to guide it along that line. I'm not pulling, I'm just guiding so that it stays straight. And then when I get to the edge, I'm not back stitching. I'm just going to pull it up, pull my presser foot up, and clip my thread. So that now you can see my long basting stitch. And on the back side, you can see the blue basting stitch. Okay. The next thing I'll do is I'll iron this open. And why would we do that? We'd use basting, again, what's it for? To temporarily hold things together. If I don't iron, it's going to look like that bad piece in our on our assignment page. But if I do iron, it will be nice and flat. So to iron this, I'm going to put my iron point right at this seam. You can actually iron it flat first, which puts moisture in. And then it makes it more easy to manipulate. Open it up. So I'm opening it up here. And then I can iron this, putting the point right on the seam. And now you can see it's very flat. And it's flat and beautiful on the other side. Okay, let's take a look at the plain seam with seam finishes. So again, this is on our canvas page. We're going to make sure that our fabric is right sides together. I'm looking at it right sides together. I want to make sure that my edges are exactly matching. Right here, one is not longer than the other. Put my pin in, perpendicular to my edge, perpendicular to my stitching line, and put my second pin in perpendicular to my stitching line. So I've ripped this. Both pieces are exactly the same length. So they should be exactly the same length when you put them together. And then make sure that the edges meet exactly. Okay. And what do I need to do to make my plain seam? Well, we were on basting, so I absolutely need to go right back up to my 2.5, which is my standard stitch length. Okay. If you have a 7, you're going to have 3.5 as your standard stitch length. Your stitch length might also be a knob. So on Ezra, yours is probably a knob, and yours might be in inches, and it would be 10 is the one that would be your average length. So that would be your average, and then to do basting, you'd be at 5, okay? So on this one, because it is a permanent seam, I'm going to backstitch. Still working with my 5/8 of an inch, going to the 2nd line. I will stitch a couple of stitches in and then go back. And this locks it in. And then I release that and I can stitch to the end of my sample. Tracing, I'm really going to trace this right along that line so I keep it right at 5/8 of an inch. And you can see if I'm careful, the needle's going to jump over that pin because that's what it wants to do. And at this end, I'm going to backstitch. And when I'm done, I make sure my take-up lever's in the full upright position. I pull my fabric away and snip at the edge of my fabric. Remove my pins. Take a look at this on one side and on the other side. And you can see the difference because this is a smaller stitch. We're going to press this open, and then we have 2 seam finishes, 1 for each of the seam allowances. So I'll quickly press like Julia Child. Why do we care about this? Because this unraveling can wear your garment out, okay? Now we have an overlock machine here, which was demoed before, which edge finishes this. I will show you a sample of that. If you have a zigzag, you're going to do this edge finish, which is you're going to straight stitch at 1/4 of an inch, which is generally 1 presser foot away, and then you'll zigzag on top. So one side, we're going to zigzag and straight stitch. Straight stitch first. No need to back stitch because we're not holding this together. We are just finishing the edge. Snip and snip.
Pam, could you finish the edges before you plain stitched them together?
No.
Oh,
That's you. I mean, the reason why not generally is because you want to fit it on your body first. And I just, that's a good question. I've never done it that way and I've never heard it being done that way. So there must be a reason. If you don't have a zigzag, because the next step is to just, I'm trying to get rid of this thread. You can see it's uncooperative. But thanks for that question, Cara. Certain times we do finish things. Like we'll go around the whole thing with an overlock. Certain times we will do that. So, I shouldn't be too hasty in saying that. Now I'm going to set my zigzag at 2.5. So, which is about halfway. Make sure my thread is good here. And I'm going to zigzag over my stitch. Zigzag is a diagonal stitch. Remember, we know that from bias. And bias doesn't ravel. So this stitch is to inhibit raveling. Okay. If you don't, and again, take your take-up bar all the way up, your take-up lever. So why am I showing you this other one? Because we finished things like this for a long time before we had overlock. Before we had zigzag, we did the clean finish, and I'm going to show you that. I'm putting this back to 0. I'm going to stitch this at 1/4 of an inch. there's all kinds of really beautiful finishes. You could look up Hong Kong finish, which has in your book, it has a bias tape finish on it. So I'm going to straight stitch at 1/4 of an inch. And that's because that's going to help me press this down. Make sure my take-up lever is all the way to the top. Always remember that. Well, you'll hear that over and over. Okay, so I have my zigzag and I have my straight stitch. Now I'm going to take that to the iron. And this stitch allows me to fold it right on that line. It gives me an extra way to fold. So I'm going to do that. You guys are just going to wait for a second. I'm not going to give you whiplash by continuing to move that around. But you'll see that I will have it folded. Actually, I am going to show you something. So just come up here with me for a minute. So I am going to do this, but I want to show you this is a sewing aid. This is a sleeve board, and sometimes it's easier to work not on a super flat surface, but on a smaller board. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking my 1/4 piece, I'm going to fold it right there, and I'm going to press that under. So this would be appropriate for jackets. You know, that would be the only time I can imagine doing this finish. Hong Kong unlined jackets and Hong Kong seam finish in a contrasting color is really beautiful. So I just want you to know what it's like. So now you see that this edge is folded. There's my stitching line. And now I'm going to edge stitch this on the fold. This side is done with my zigzag, okay? And I'll show you the overlock as well. Let me get to my straight stitch. So this is a sample of the overlock stitch, which will cut and finish that edge. And here's our zigzag. So that's an alternate. That's a multiple thread machine, and one is sitting right here. Okay. So now I'll stitch along that edge. I have my nice folded line to work with. I'm on my 2.5. So I'm ready to go. And even just a straight stitch without a zigzag will help inhibit fraying. So I'm stitching very close to my folded edge. Oops, unfolded it. So I'll have to go back and fix that. Okay. There's our plain seam. It is a 2.5 regular stitch, back stitch top and bottom, pressed open and flat, with the edges secured with 2 different seam finishes, a straight stitch zigzag, or if you don't have a zigzag, just do straight stitch, and then a clean finish, which is a straight stitch folded and edge stitched on top. Okay, that is our plain seam. Plain seam. Let's go back to the board and, well, you know what? We're going to screen share because I want to show you the welt seam. I can show it to you. I have it on our site first. Okay, so this is the one that we just looked at, the 2-edge finish, overlock or the clean finish, straight stitch at 1/4 inch. I guess I need to put edit on. Oh, well, I'll have to do it when I'm not screen sharing. Sorry about that. Okay, straight stitch at 1/4 inch, fold under and press, and then top stitch the edge. The alternate is zigzag with straight stitch. Next, we're going to do welt seam. Again, right sides are together. We will stitch at 5/8 of an inch, overlock or finish the seam allowance together, press to one side, however you want to finish it. Finish your seam allowance together, and then press to one side. And then on the right side, top stitch. So on the inside, it looks like this. Here's my seam. Here's my finished edge. And this is my top stitched edge. Okay, that's on the inside. On the outside, here's my seam. And here's my top stitched edge. All right. Does everybody see that? Inside, you've got one line of stitching, a second line of stitching, and an edge finish. But on the outside, you see just your seam, your invisible seam with your one line of top stitching. So that's the welt seam. Now I'll detail that on the board. So we'll stop share and go to the board. And again, it's going to look like this. On the inside, we have our stitching line. This is our top stitching is actually holding this down. That's why you can't see it. It's a very faint line. And then our edge finish. And on the right side, we just have the seam and the top stitched. So we come to here. Stitch at 5/8 of an inch. Open it. Press to one side. Okay. Press. With this, sorry, first we're going to finish this. You're going to finish the edge, whether that's zigzag, together, or you can straight stitch it. Okay, so zigzag if you have it, and if you don't, straight stitch both edges together. You don't need to fold it. That will be too bulky. Because we are going to have this third line of stitching, you're going to press it this way, and then on the right side, when it looks like this, you will stitch 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch away so that you get the single top stitched, one line of top stitching. On the right side. When we say top stitch, it means we're doing it on the right side. Okay, let's just go to the machine. I am starting with 2 pieces, right side together. Remember, I have cut all my pieces at once. So I am just pressing these 2 so that they will be right sides together. And this is what we call, this is very much what you see on jeans. What is the advantage of this stitch? That's in your template. You need to tell me how to make the stitch and what is the advantage. So the plain seam is the most commonly used and it's the easiest. Basting, of course, is temporarily holding 2 pieces of fabric together, just like hand basting. But this stitch, because you are stitching it twice, both with your seam and your top stitching, you are making a stronger seam. So this is where you need strength. Often it can be done in a crotch. It can be down the leg of jeans. It's done with more industrial fabric. So I'm lining up my 2 pieces together here, top and bottom and edge. Again, I'm going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch. Locating my second bar right here, my second groove. I will backstitch. So a couple stitches. You want to make sure you have plenty of thread here because if your take-up lever is not all the way up, you might jerk your thread out. That's always unfortunate. And back a couple stitches. And then I go down my 5/8. And backstitch. And this is the point at which you would, if you were in class here, you would go to the overlock and you'd overlock this edge together. Very fun. But since we're not in class like that, I'm going to zigzag just like you're going to zigzag. And if you don't have zigzag, just a line of stitching will work, okay? So I'm going to zigzag these 2 pieces together about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. And a 1/4 of an inch is about your presser foot width. Your presser foot has 2 pieces like this. One of these is about 1/4 of an inch. So line that up on the edge and just stitch it down. Ah, I'm doing my zigzag, okay? Zigzag. Both stitches are together, both seams, press to one side. And on this, you want to make sure that you press it very flat. So it was like this, and then I press it very flat so that I can turn it over and now I can top stitch. And I'm going to put a pin here so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to run my stitch about 3/8 of an inch away from my seam line, which is here. And on the inside, you see that will catch inside of my zigzag. Okay, I'm going to do that to finish. There is a directional intention about which side you fold to, but it doesn't make sense in a sample. It makes sense when you're working on a garment. On a garment, you want it to be aerodynamic. So you want the folds to be facing to the back. Oh, have to remember to put my straight stitch back on or I'll have a zigzag top stitch, which I don't want. I'm still at 2.5, which is appropriate for top stitching. And now this is my finish. Top stitching is done on the right side, not the wrong side of the garment. Okay? Because you want to see what you're doing. You want to make sure you're lined up with that seam. So I did my top stitch right here. Here's my seam. Here's my top stitch. I'll show it this way. Here's my seam, and there's my top stitch. And on the inside, there's my original seam, my top stitch, and my edge finish. So what is this called? Welt seam. Very strong, 2 lines of stitching. So it is really strong, okay? And then finally, the last seam that we're going to do is the French seam. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in our screen share. We come down here to French seam. I'm going to talk this through. You're actually going to place wrong sides together, stitch seam at 1/4 of an inch, and then trim in half. Or trim to 1/8 inch. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say, yeah, that's fine. Okay. And then you will press to one side. And now you have raw edges hanging out on your garment. So that's going to be this. Then you turn it to the inside. Now I'm inside, and you encase this 1/8 of an inch seam in another seam, and it becomes an envelope. So this is my 1/8 of an inch seam, and I press again on my wrong side, okay? Flat filled seam is advanced only, so we'll talk about that later. So you want to press to one side. Turn fabric right side out. Actually, wrong side out. And stitch at, I'll use that at sign, 1/4 of an inch. And then you will not see it. This becomes just like a regular seam. It appears a regular seam on the right side. So this is a very good piece for sheer fabric. If you want to create a style line with a seam, this is a very good way to do it because you'll have no raw edges peeking through. Okay, so let me just go to the board and give you the math. And I'll show you my demo. So here is a finished French seam. Here's my envelope, my last 1/4 inch stitch, and on the right side, it's completely invisible. To get there, oh, I don't have it in here. Just a second, I think I have one where I can show you that it is inside of it. Here we go. So on this one, that's my inside, but here's my wrong side. See, there's my cut edge. That's what it's going to look like after the first pass, and I trim it. Then I'm going to press it to one side, turn it so that I'm now stitching on my wrong side. Okay, that's why I start with wrong sides together first. Then I put that into this envelope and I stitch, encasing that inside. So if we look here, there it is. But when I press it open, you don't see anything because this is hidden inside that seam allowance. So let's start here. You want wrong sides together. So you're looking at the right side or the bright side. And it's very counterintuitive. It's going to seem bizarre. Stitch at 1/4 of an inch. Very close to the edge. Then you're going to cut that in half. Okay, I'm going to cut this in half. Like that. Okay. Press. So your seam allowance cut in half. Press to one side. Turn fabric. Wrong side out. So now I'm going to fold it, and then I'm going to encase the raw edges by stitching at 1/4 of an inch. Okay. So that's what we're going to do. Going to work with my same pieces that I've always been working with, but this time I'm starting opposite. I have 2 pieces here. Same like same. I'm going to press them to moisten and make them nice and flat. Get rid of all my extraneous threads. Okay. And this time, instead of doing right sides together, I'm doing wrong sides together. So the bright piece is out. Gonna pin. This one you have to go on faith and just do the steps and it will turn out. It seems like you're making a mistake in the beginning. So I'm having my pattern, my bright part of my pattern face me. I'm going to do my 2 pins. Many of you have a pin catcher, a magnetic piece here or up here, which you can use to just keep a few pins on hand. The first stitch line will be at 1/4 of an inch. 1/4 of an inch. I picked up 2 pins. So I'm going to back stitch. Again, that's my presser foot. I'm on straight stitch 2.5, always double checking. Going to stitch a couple of stitches. I generally hold this top thread a little bit. Just a couple stitches, back a couple, and stitch down a couple. And now I'm going to go along my presser foot at my 1/4 of an inch. And backstitch. Always backstitch both of these seams because they have integrity. Both of them are necessary to hold the seam. Then I can take my pins out. Looking at my seam, yes, 1/4 of an inch. Great. Now I'm going to trim that in half. So this is a very tricky, not really tricky, but you want to be careful that you're not cutting into something. Trim it in half by just trimming it like this. You see how I can make that go away? If that seems too narrow, you can do 3/8 of an inch. We generally do a quarter because the thickness takes up a bit. Okay, so you see I'm cutting half of my seam allowance away. My next step is press to one side. So I'll open it. Press to one side. I'm going to turn it. Then I will stitch on the wrong side. So let me go to my iron and press to one side. That wasn't very tidy there. Okay. So like I said, a lot of time at the ironing board. Press to one side. Holding my fabric flat, so I'm really flat on one side. So now it's nice and flat. This side is also nice and flat. This is the wrong side of my fabric, remember? Just going to give that a press to make sure it's really flat. Sometimes what happens is you get a little fold here, so we really don't want that. So I've pressed to one side. Now I'm going to fold on my seam line and I'll press again because it will make it super flat and easy to work with. You can even press both sides if you want. Can't have too much pressing. So now I have trimmed. I've encased this to the inside by pressing to one side. And now I'm going to stitch down my 1/4 of an inch. Let's take a look. Ordinarily, when you're stitching, you want to stitch with thread that matches what you're doing. When we do our face masks, we will be stitching with thread that matches. So I'm going to go 1/4 of an inch, which is the width of my presser foot, and stitch, back stitch, and continue stitching. And back stitch, and clip, and clip. There's my 1/4 of an inch on both sides. And when I open it up, that raw edge has disappeared. So my last step, of course, is to press. So I bring my piece right up here. I can press once to moisten. And then I can open it up. Press. And you know what? I will take photos so that you can see these online. And now this doesn't show, nothing shows on the right side, but I have this beautifully encased seam on the wrong side. I love French seam. It's so beautiful. So incredibly beautiful. So this is what you're going to work on. And we have another 15 minutes of class. If you want to, I'm going to be here. Feel free to go ahead and start sewing. Okay. So first you're going to, cut all of your pieces so that you have 8 3.5 by 7s, and then just go ahead with basting and basting and plain seam. Basting, plain seam, and welt seam all start with wrong sides together. French seam's the only oddball. Questions? Too many to ask? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.